take another 15 years at least for all the railway lines to be put in place. And in tandem, all the regulations also have to be put in place so that the infrastructure and the regulations go hand in hand, and then the railway traffic can start flowing to a higher proportion than it is today. So one obvious benefit is going to be definitely environmentally friendly mode of transport. I mean, just if you look at the carbon emissions of rail is much better, much lower than what it is for trucks. That is one very big benefit. The second very, very big benefit is that at the border crossing point, there could be a huge amount of time saving.
Right.
Because what happens today, if you kind of imagine in your mind, let us say some 500 trucks are crossing the border at some point. Okay, each one of those trucks has to be processed by the customs of either country. Now, if it is consolidated in a railway train, then the processes need not be done exactly at the border crossing point. It can cross over inside the hinterland. So if you take the case of India, a lot of cargo comes at the JNPT or Mundra port. A lot of containers come, but they are not handled at the port. They are put onto a train and they are brought to Delhi, to a place called Tughlakabad or to a place called Dadri. And at this point, everything is being, the processes are being carried out, the customs clearance is being carried out. So you don't need to do anything at the port. One very big benefit is that you could have facilities which is inside the countries, inside the hinterland, if I use that term. So at the border, the congestion can be brought down.
Right.
That's one other very big benefit. And the third benefit is, of course, the cost. Because on an overall basis, the transportation cost by rail is lesser than the transportation cost by road. And the fourth big advantage is also about pilferage and diversion of cargo.
Thank you so much for joining me, Rajaji. We have Rajaji Meshram here today. He is Distinguished Fellow of the Infravision Foundation, as well as an independent logistic and transport expert who was former partner of the NY and formerly with the Indian Railways, where he began his career. So perfectly positioned and placed to talk about the regional rail transport that is developing between India, Bangladesh, Nepal and Bhutan. Both from the point of view of infrastructure as well as geostrategy, very, very key developments. And I think most of them are in the process of coming to fruition over the next few years. So clearly it's going to be a very different kind of neighborhood that we'll see, hopefully. So let's talk about that. Raja, do you want to take us through the issues and the challenges of this regional rail transport?
Yeah. So so this project is something that I'm doing for Asian Development Bank. Asian Development Bank being a neutral organization involved and interested in economic development of the region, they have a program called SASEC. Now, SASEC stands for South Asia Sub-Regional Economic Cooperation. Okay,
right.
It involves a few countries. It involves Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Maldives, Myanmar, Nepal, and Sri Lanka. Now, what ADB is able to do is that it is able to contact the key government departments of these countries and regularly invite them to some quarterly or half-yearly meetings in various countries. In these meetings, they discuss how can we increase regional cooperation. So the regional cooperation, one of the obvious things to focus on is regional trade. So if you have trade amongst these countries, how can you make that trade very good, seamless, without too much hassle? And to make trade seamless and hassle-free, two things are very important. One is that the logistics part of it, how you move the goods from one country to the other, has to be smooth. The transport infrastructure has to be smooth. The second part is obviously the regulations. So what are the custom procedures? What are the other kind of treaties and memorandum of understandings that you have with each country? That also needs to be in place, right? And as you can understand and appreciate, is that whenever multiple countries are involved, then there are different considerations rather than just the simple cost economics or feasibility, etc., etc.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. So as things stand today, most of this trade is happening only majorly by road.
Right.
And road, of course, has its own problems. It has more carbon emissions, cannot take things in one bulk kind of a thing. And generally, one truth about the road transportation is that there are no large agencies or large institutional players who own a lot of a fleet of trucks and they provide logistics. Usually, the truck industry is very fragmented. There would be multiple owners forming a large proportion of the trucks that are available, who own only one or two trucks, right? And they form a large portion of the pool. So the question really is that, can you shift from road to rail? So that's the essence of the assignment that I'm doing. ADB has appointed me as an independent consultant and expert. They've also brought in a professional consulting firm as KPMG, which is also doing this work. So the reports of that will be very soon in the public domain, maybe within a month or two, which will then be available for everybody to read through and understand what the key issues are. So that's a broad kind of a background of the assignment.
Right. But a lot of the railways is already being built, or is it just at the conceptual plan?
Right. So the railways in India, of course, is very extensive. Yes. India is one of the largest railway systems in the world.
Right.
I think we come only, we only rank, or the countries which have a larger network than us, I think would be China, Russia and US are all in the ballpark. Indian Railways has almost around 69,000 kilometers of railway track under its administration. It is also one of the largest employers, organized employers in the world, not just in India, in the world. I mean, some 12 to 13 lakh employees work in the Indian Railways, and it is one of the single largest organizations having that kind of a thing. So India, of course, has a very extensive network. Okay. Now Bangladesh also has a network. Nepal and Bhutan don't. Okay. Now there are railway networks, but for a person who is not from a railway background, there is a term that you need to understand, which is called gauge. Now, what is this gauge? Gauge is basically the distance between two railway tracks. Okay. So in India, what we use is something known as a broad gauge. Okay. And it's very unique to our country. And most of the other countries in the world, like Europe, China, Japan, USA, when they have railways, their gauge is something known as a standard gauge. So the distance between the two tracks, the two railway patri jisko kehte hain, that is 1676 mm in India, 1.67 meters. In other countries, it is 1435 mm, 1.4 meters. So ours is broader. Okay. Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, and India, if you can kind of visualize this, if their sizes are the same, then it's very easy for one train from one country to go to the other country. Let us say that, one country has 1676, other country has 1 meter, for example. Then how will one train from here go to the other side? In a road, you don't think of such problems. A truck is a truck, it will run on a road. It is coming on a road in India, it will go on a road in Nepal or Bhutan or Bangladesh. But in railways, it's not like that. In railways, you have to take care that the two tracks are at the same distance. Otherwise, how will the locomotive, how will the passenger coach or the freight wagon, how will it even travel? So the biggest of these four countries is Bangladesh and India. Now, Bangladesh and India do have railway networks, but what we have to be very careful or what we have to work to make this regional transportation work is that the gauges need to be the same. So to answer your question, there are railway networks, but there are certain things that need to be put in place so that this entire thing becomes seamless and very smooth.
Right. Essentially, it's the last mile connectivity between these between these four nations. I mean, from what I gather, for the Bangladesh network, it begins from Kokrajhar in Assam and it ends in a city in Bangladesh. I'm not sure which. So the last mile connectivity of both these have to be the same gauge, I imagine. But
No.
that,
Yeah.
how will it work? Or you'll have to change the gauge of that entire network, right?
Yes, it has to be the same gauge in the entire network. So see, I appreciate that you use the word last mile connectivity. Usually, that's a term which is oft used in transport, logistics, railways discussions. But I would say that the more relevant term when you look at regional kind of connectivity is border crossing points. So if you can appreciate that these countries obviously share borders with each other, right? India has a border with Nepal, with Bhutan, with Bangladesh. At the border, what is happening? Suppose, imagine in your line that the border is a straight line, a horizontal line. Okay. The track from India is going to the border. It is broad gauge. Now, when I cross the border and go to the Bangladesh side, also there has to be a track. That track has to connect to the Indian railways, the Indian side of the railway track, and both have to be of the same gauge. So the more relevant term here would be, when you think about this, when you want to understand this, border crossing points. Where are the border crossing points where both the governments are comfortable in allowing each other to cross? And then at those border crossing points, do you have the railway line, and do you have the railway line which has got the same gauge? That's how you need to think about it. So the ones that you mentioned, I appreciate that, because you must have done some homework and known those names. But one of the important names is a place called Petropol. Benapole. This is in West Bengal and Bangladesh border.
Yeah.
This is a very important point. And another important point for Nepal and India is called Raxaul. And on the Nepal side, it's called Birganj. Okay, so these are the border crossing points. Now, these points, there are railway lines which go, and then there are railway lines on either side of the border. They are of the same gauge, and therefore they allow a train to go from one country to the other country. Right? So instead of a last mile connectivity, anybody who wants to understand border, regional kind of transportation has to understand, okay, what are the border crossing points? Which are those points at the border where I need the railway line? So that's one aspect. The second aspect, you will have to ask, okay, the railway fellows have made their railway lines. What about the custom fellows? Have they spoken to each other? Have they agreed on a procedure? Right? So these are the two things that need to fall in place. Then there are others, but these are the two big things that need to fall in place. After that, things can happen.
Right. It's so fascinating because, I mean, the amount of research obviously that goes on to understand which are the border crossings that are possible. Will the two countries also agree to those border crossings? Because these are all very sensitive borders, especially, better, especially with Bangladesh. So you have to be careful that it has to be a point which both countries are comfortable with, right? There's so many issues involved. So where does the geostrategic play come in? Because we don't always have very good relationships with some of our neighbors. What does that impact these developments in any way?
They definitely do. The geopolitical considerations is what is a setback at this point in time to some extent. But to address an earlier point that you made, how do these points get chosen? Now, actually, we don't need to choose these points. What I mean by that is that these countries have existed for centuries, and trade between these countries has been happening for ages. So these points where the maximum amount of trade is already established. So people know that at these points, why did Petropol, Benapole gain significance? It has historically been like that. Why did Raxaul, Birganj gain significance? It has been historically like that. So when already trade exists, then you need to then you need to put in infrastructure and processes and regulations to make it easier, make it seamless, and make it smoother. The geopolitical thing is what the complication is. Now, for a very long time, World Bank has been trying to get a kind of an agreement signed between these 4 countries. Okay, that the trucks of each country should be allowed to go into the other country. An Indian truck should be allowed to go into Nepal. A Nepal truck should be allowed to come into India. A Bhutan truck should be allowed to come into India. An Indian truck should be allowed to get into Bhutan. Vice versa for Bangladesh, etc. But they are not able to come to an agreement. Now, if you just ponder about this for a minute, you would, why is this happening? Why is it not happening? Now, the point is that there are truck owners on either side, on all the countries. So all of them are a little worried that we'll lose our business. Just imagine that Bhutan is such a small country as compared to India. I mean, I don't know the exact number, but there could be an order of 10 to 20 times the number of trucks in India vis-a-vis the trucks in Bhutan. Suddenly somebody said, the government of Bhutan said, okay, we allow your trucks to come into our country. Maybe those guys will completely lose their livelihood. So these are the kind of geopolitical considerations. The other consideration is also, of security and basically a large part is security, saying that we can't keep our borders too open as well. Right. So they do want to have restrictions. There could be military considerations. So these things do play a role, and therefore traditionally, if trade has been ongoing in certain border locations, which has already been happening for centuries, there has been very consistent effort that is happening to make things smoother and smoother at these places.
Right. So where are we at currently? I mean, when you look at it and you think about it, it seems like a mini EU that is coming together, where, you should have absolutely no issue in terms of goods passing from one country to another country faster, better for exports in all the countries put together, better for the Northeast, especially in India. I mean, it seems like a no-brainer. Yet, obviously, as you said, there are problems. But where are we at currently? Can we say that in the next 10 years or in the next 5 years, we'll have X number of kilometers between all these 4 nations, which can help in the free movement of goods and maybe services also at some point?
So, rail, okay, and I think if you kind of looked at those statistics, maybe between India and Bangladesh, almost 60 to 70% is happening by road and only 30% is happening by rail.
Right.
In the case of Nepal and India, again, I think the proportion of rail could be closer to that same number of 30 to 40%, and a large part is happening by road. Now, why is this happening? Now, railways has got certain characteristics. Now, if you have seen a railway train in our country and you are unlucky enough to be at a level crossing gate and the gate has just closed when the train is passing, you will have to wait for 58 wagons to pass. 58 wagons.
58.
Let us say 58 wagons. Yeah. Right. 58 wagons to pass. So a train carries close to around 3,500 tons of cargo. Okay, it's a long thing, and that's the nature of that particular mode of transport. How much does a truck carry? 20 tons. How much does a train carry? 3,000 to 3,500 tons. So what naturally jumps into your mind as a result of just this basic piece of information is that for railways to work, you need to have 3,000 to 4,000 tons of cargo in one place.
Right.
Railways is not going to run 1 or 2 wagons.
Right.
You are not going to be so lucky that you stand behind a railway crossing gate and a train is passing by and it has only 2 wagons or 2 coaches. No, it's going to be long, right? That's how it makes sense. That's how it makes economic sense, financial sense for the railways to run. So there are many times where it's not possible to have so much of cargo put together at one go, and therefore in those cases railways will just not be able to function.
Right.
So there are inherent issues. So it's not that you can become 100%. There will be always certain small amounts and lots of cargo which cannot be put onto a train, because the train to run requires a sheer big size. So even if you did everything, you put all the infrastructure in place, you put all the regulations in place, still you would not be able to go for 100%.
Right.
So that's one of the answers to your question. Why, if it is a no-brainer, why is it not happening? So that's one of the points. Second point is also that unlike roads, what you do is that you just put a road, and after that you don't worry too much about it. I mean, you need a trucks can run, this and run. But in railways, it's not like that. In railways, after you have put the track, then you have to have the locomotive, then you have to have the wagons, then you have to have the signaling. Everything has to work in tandem. It's a larger investment. It requires a lot of systems to work together in a coordinated fashion. And therefore, it requires that much more investment and time to put things together. Right? So these things are there, which kind of naturally restrict the amount of share that railways can have. But having said that, it can definitely be increased. Many times we find that the right infrastructure is not available, the right regulation is not available. So something is very funny. When we did this project, when I'm doing this project for ADB, there's a location called Jogbani. This is on the Indian side, and a parallel location is in the Nepal side is called Biratnagar. Okay. Now we went to Kathmandu. We went to the railway board in New Delhi and asked, is there a railway line which connects Jogbani to Biratnagar? Answer is yes, there is a railway line. Then we said, okay, if there is a railway line, why is the railway train not going from here to there? We understand trains are not going. They said, everybody said different things. They said, we don't have a custom notification, or the local truck industry is not interested. There's a lot of resistance. Nepal is not interested. So many reasons. Then we had the good fortune from ADB to actually go to Jogbani, and the officials there were very, very forthcoming, very cooperative. And then they told us that a treaty of transit has been signed between India and Nepal in 2023. In the treaty of transit, it is written that any train that comes to Jogbani, the cargo from that train has to be unloaded at Jogbani, and you have to take it by truck. So they say that, look, if it is already written like this in the treaty, what can we do? Even if there is a railway line, we can't go against the treaty. And we said, oh, if this is the reason, then why? Then we started asking the right questions. So why have you put this into the treaty? Then they said, oh, no. When it was being inaugurated at that time, we were not ready. Now we have asked for the modification of this treaty. It is going to happen in 2025, and once that happens, the trains will run. So what I am trying to explain to you is that on one hand, there are reasons why railways cannot go to 100%, but there are also other some trivial reasons, or maybe certain other regulatory reasons why which things are not happening. And once those put in place, definitely the proportion and the percentage of railway share can go up.
So fascinating, each country and each border crossing, so to speak, must be having its own peculiarity and its own challenges. When you see this whole network, which seems so wonderful on paper, when you see this whole network actually coming to fruition, actually developing?
So, actually, some bit of it is already happening. The only country, as far as India and our border country is concerned, where trains are not going, is Bhutan. So, from India, trains do go up to the border of Nepal, which is up to a place called Raxaul in India, and then on the Nepal side, it's called Birganj. As far as Bangladesh is concerned, trains do run. In fact, there is a passenger train, which I think is called the Maitri Express, which runs from Kolkata to Dhaka. So it's already passenger trains are there. Sorry?
It's a weekly train.
I don't remember the frequency, but it's a regular service that runs.
Right.
Okay. So the networks are already in place. And Bhutan is the only country where a train doesn't go right up to the border because there is no railway line. So right now,
Right.
2 railway lines are being planned, and once those get built, then trains at least will go right up to the border of Bhutan, as they do in the case of Nepal. In the case of Bangladesh, the trains don't stop at the border because Bangladesh has got a good railway network, so they go into the country of Bangladesh, and to that extent, trains do kind of cross across the border for these two countries. So, and there are certain points which still require at the border some railway lines to be built. And in the ADB's project, there are projections because these lines need time to be built. So I think it would take another 15 years at least for all the railway lines to be put in place. And in tandem, all the regulations also have to be put in place so that the infrastructure and the regulations go hand in hand, and then the railway traffic can start flowing to a higher proportion than it is today.
And what do you think will the benefits of this be for all the countries involved?
So one obvious benefit is going to be definitely environmentally friendly mode of transport. I mean, just if you look at the carbon emissions of rail is much better, much lower than what it is for trucks. That is one very big benefit. The second very, very big benefit is that at the border crossing point, there could be a huge amount of time saving.
Right.
Because what happens today, if you kind of imagine in your mind, let us say some 500 trucks are crossing the border at some point. Okay, each one of those trucks has to be processed by the customs of either country. Now, if it is consolidated in a railway train, then the processes need not be done exactly at the border crossing point. It can cross over inside the hinterland. So if you take the case of India, a lot of cargo comes at the JNPT or Mundra port. A lot of containers come, but they are not handled at the port. They are put onto a train and they are brought to Delhi, to a place called Tughlakabad or to a place called Dadri. And at this point, everything is being, the processes are being carried out, the customs clearance is being carried out. So you don't need to do anything at the port. One very big benefit is that you could have facilities which is inside the countries, inside the hinterland, if I use that term. So at the border, the congestion can be brought down.
Right.
That's one other very big benefit. And the third benefit is, of course, the cost. Because on an overall basis, the transportation cost by rail is lesser than the transportation cost by road. And the fourth big advantage is also about pilferage and diversion of cargo, etc. Because once you put a cargo onto a train, you can't lift the train or divert the train. It will have to stick to the track. But a truck can go here and there, right? So you can open a truck, you can take cargo out of it, etc. So security of the cargo is also much better if you are transporting by rail. So these are some of the benefits that are obvious if you use rail.
Sure, I can see why you're so involved in it. Have you been involved in this project?
Sorry, can you repeat?
How long have you been involved in this project?
So the project has been going on for some time, almost 1.5 to 2 years. And the key reason is, of course, geopolitics, because it takes time. And Asian Development Bank, at the end of the day, is a neutral body, but they have to follow all kinds of protocols. So get the countries together. There are a lot of permissions. You can't just, independently do a study as well. You need to get permissions from countries, and they have to allow. And even if data has to be shared, then permissions have to be sought. And bringing everybody onto a table, bringing them to a consensus, getting, let us say at the end of this project, a set of projects, a set of infrastructure, railway line construction kind of list is chalked out, then everybody has to agree to that. So all that takes time. So yeah, it's been going on for kind of 1.5 years now.
Even within the country, the Chenab Bridge has taken us how long? 17 years to actually build and inaugurate the Chenab Railway Bridge.
The Chenab railway bridge, I don't know that number offhand, but of course, Kashmir is also a very geopolitically sensitive area. The project itself is challenging. It is one of the tallest bridges in the world. It's even higher than the Eiffel Tower. So I think that would be, you are trying kind of comparing a normal building with Taj Mahal kind of a thing. A normal railway project takes time. So I think it's the construction of the railway project will not be so challenging from a construction or engineering perspective. It will be more challenging from finding where the funds are going to come in from, and there should be geopolitical agreement, etc. So those are bigger challenges rather than the engineering challenge itself, which was the case in the Chenab bridge.
Right. Wonderful. It's really wonderful to talk to you, Rajaji, to understand, something that for us may seem so simple. What's the big deal? Putting a network of railway lines between four nations, but not always on good terms, but more or less. But you realize the challenges. So thank you so much for talking to us, and we'll come back to you and we'll discuss your other project that you're working on another occasion, which is you're involved with the Gati Shakti project as well. So that's something we'll talk to you about later. But thank you so much for talking to us about this. And I hope we see it in our lifetime.
No, we will. I think everybody understands that this is very beneficial to the region, and definitely of officials that I met, they're very progressive, very, they want things to happen on the ground. So I definitely am hopeful that it will happen very sooner than later.
Thank you so much, Rajan.
Thank you.